What if I told you the same people you picture in hooded robes chanting under oak trees might also have been handing out herbal remedies and performing something dangerously close to surgery? The word druid makes most people think of magic, mystery, and maybe even fantasy video games. But what if the truth is less about fireballs and more about fungus, honey, and questionable knives? Stick with me, because by the end of this video you'll know whether Celtic Druids were miracle healers, skilled proto-doctors, or just really good storytellers who sold herbs as magic. Before we dig into that, quick favor. If you like uncovering the truth behind myths, tap the like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, if you could ask a druid one question, what would it be? I want to see how creative you can get. All right, let's set the scene. The Celts were spread across Europe from Ireland to Gaul, from Britain to parts of Central Europe. The Druids were their priestly class, the elite who supposedly knew all the secrets of the gods, the stars, the law, and the forest. Ancient writers like Julius Caesar and Pliny the Elder described Druids with a mix of awe and suspicion. But here's the catch. The Druids themselves left no written records. Everything we think we know about them comes from outsiders, often Romans, who weren't exactly unbiased. So right away, you've got the first problem: separating reality from Roman propaganda. The Romans painted Druids as dangerous cult leaders, sometimes emphasizing bloody sacrifices to make themselves look justified in conquering Celtic lands. But in the same breath, they also admitted the Druids were highly educated, respected, and sometimes feared because of their knowledge. So could that knowledge have included healing? Let's start with the myths. Later medieval sources claim Druids were masters of herbal lore, able to cure diseases with mistletoe plucked from sacred oaks and potions brewed under the full moon. You've probably heard of the Asterix comics with the druid Getafix whipping up magic potion. That image comes straight out of the idea that Druids were the keepers of mystical remedies. But what does evidence actually say? Archaeologists have uncovered clues that suggest Celtic healing wasn't all smoke and mirrors. Across Celtic sites, from Britain to Gaul, they've found traces of herbs like yarrow, meadowsweet, and willow bark. And here's where it gets interesting. Willow bark contains salicin, a natural chemical that works like aspirin. Meadowsweet has similar pain-relieving properties. Yarrow has antiseptic qualities and was used to stop bleeding. So whether or not Druids understood chemistry, they knew enough from trial and error that certain plants worked. Now here's a weird tidbit. Pliny the Elder wrote that Druids gathered mistletoe with golden sickles and thought it could cure infertility, poison, and even serve as an antidote to disease. Was he exaggerating? Probably, but modern studies do show mistletoe contains compounds that have been explored for medical use, even in cancer treatments today. The dosage is tricky too much, and it's toxic. But the fact that the Druids singled it out shows they were noticing properties in plants that had real biological effects. Let's move from plants to practices. Some burial sites in Celtic regions reveal skulls with evidence of trepanation. That's when a hole is cut into the skull, usually to relieve pressure after head injury. Think about that. Without anesthesia, without sterile tools, someone drilled or scraped into bone, and in some cases the bone shows signs of healing, which means the patient lived. Who would have had the authority, skill, and guts to attempt that? A local healer, possibly a druid. But before you imagine them as white-robed neurosurgeons, let's add context. Trepanation wasn't unique to the Celts. It's found in cultures around the world. Still, the fact it existed among them suggests they were willing to experiment with medical intervention beyond herbs. And here's where myths and reality really clash. Roman accounts often portray Druids as mysterious magicians casting spells, but modern archaeology suggests they were observing, experimenting, and passing knowledge down orally. Their magic may have been the way they packaged their expertise to keep authority. After all, if you can stop bleeding with yarrow but convince your people it's divine power, you don't just heal the body, you cement your status as the community's bridge to the gods. Now let's talk about honey. Archaeological residue from Celtic pottery shows honey was widely used. Beyond being sweet, honey has antibacterial properties. Even today, doctors sometimes use medical-grade honey to treat wounds. Did Druids know the science? Not in the modern sense. But they knew honey kept wounds from festering, Combine that with herbal poultices, and you've got a fairly advanced toolkit for the Iron Age. Of course, we can't talk about druids without addressing ritual. Healing in Celtic culture wasn't purely physical. Illness was often seen as spiritual imbalance, punishment, or a disturbance of cosmic harmony. So a druid might give you willow bark tea for your headache, but also chant an incantation to the gods. The ceremony mattered as much as the medicine. And here's the fascinating part. Even today, psychology shows that ritual and belief can play a role in healing what we call the placebo effect. So in a way, their approach blended practical remedies with the power of belief, and both could help the patient. Here's a fact you'll like. In some Celtic burial sites, archaeologists found amulets carved with symbols believed to protect the wearer from disease. One example was a small stone carved with spirals, buried with a child. Did the amulet heal? No. But it shows how healing was tied to magic, protection, and social meaning. You weren't just fighting infection, you were fighting unseen forces. Now let's address the skepticism. Some historians argue the whole image of druids as healers is romanticized by later writers. Since druids didn't leave their own texts, we can't be 100% sure they were the ones doing the healing. Maybe local herbalists and midwives handled the medicine, while druids focused on religion and law. Historians still debate this, but the overlap between ritual authority and practical knowledge makes it plausible they were involved in both. Let's put this in perspective. Imagine living 2,000 years ago in a Celtic village. Someone breaks a leg. The local healer, maybe a druid, maybe not, binds it with splints made from wood and moss. They give the patient willow bark tea for pain, wrap the wound with honey-soaked bandages, and chant to the gods to protect the injured. Weeks later, the leg heals, crooked maybe, but functional. To the villagers, that's not just medicine, that's magic. That's proof the druids had power. And this raises an important point. The line between science and magic is cultural. What we call medicine today would have been sorcery centuries ago, and what they saw as divine ritual, we now recognize as chemistry or psychology. But that doesn't mean they were wrong, it just means they explained the world differently. So did Celtic Druids actually heal people? The evidence says yes, but with caveats. They used herbs with real medical effects. They probably practiced basic surgery like trepanation. They understood honey's value. They blended ritual with treatment. But they didn't have microscopes or germ theory. Their medicine was wrapped in myth and performance. Yet when you strip away the ritual, you find practical knowledge that worked often enough to keep people alive. Here's the takeaway. Myths about druids paint them as mystical sorcerers. The evidence paints them as community leaders who knew the forest's pharmacy and weren't afraid to use it. Were they miracle workers? No. But were they frauds? Also no. They were somewhere in between early scientists cloaked in ritual, and that's what makes them fascinating. Before we wrap up, let me ask you, would you trust a druid with your health if you lived back then? Drop your answer in the comments because I'm curious how many of you would roll the dice on mistletoe tea and skull surgery. If you enjoyed this dive into myth versus reality, make sure to subscribe. We've got more ancient mysteries coming, from Egyptian cures to Norse healing charms, and we're going to test them all against the evidence.